This lecture will discuss some of the early European colonists to America, the Pilgrims and the Puritans. The Pilgrims and the Puritans brought with them their own mythology, much of which focused on new beginnings. After arriving to the Americas, the Pilgrims and the Puritans saw themselves as carrying out a new beginning, in continuation of those new beginnings represented in the Christian scriptures. The first story of new beginnings found in the Christian scriptures is the story of the Garden of Eden. According to those scriptures, Adam and Eve were the first human beings placed on the earth after God created it. Adam and Eve lived in a lush and peaceful paradise created especially for them by God. Adam and Eve had free reign of the garden, but there was one thing that God told them not to do. But of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day you eat of it you shall die. Genesis 2:16. But Adam and Eve disobeyed and did eat that fruit, after being tempted to do so by the serpent. As a punishment, they were rejected from the garden by God. An angel with a flaming sword is said to now guard the gates. This angel bars anyone from ever returning to that state of original bliss. Adam and Eve and their descendants were also cursed for their disobedience. The land would now be difficult to farm, and women would have pain in childbirth. A second story of new beginnings in the Christian scriptures, with which the Pilgrims and the Puritans were familiar, was the story of Noah and the Great Flood. Years after Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, the earth had become very populous. But it had also become very wicked. As a result, God decided to destroy the earth with a flood. But he decided to save the one family who still lived a good life and pleased God. That was the family of Noah. Noah was told by God to build a boat on which to house his family and animals who were to be saved. After the flood, Noah was to start a new beginning with his righteous family. This marks a second new beginning for the world. The third and final story of new beginnings from the Christian scriptures that we will be discussing in this lecture is the story of Abraham and his journey to the promised land. Many years after Noah and the flood, God chose Abraham to start a new nation that would be an example of a good and godly people. God told Abraham, who was living in an area near what is now the country of Turkey, to leave his family and follow him to a new land. He promised that this journey would be a new beginning, and that, in the end, his descendants would be a great, powerful, and godly nation. But on the way to this new promised land, the people of Abraham, the Israelites, struggled for many years as they wandered through a harsh desert. They even spent some time enslaved in the country of Egypt. Eventually, however, God led them out of the harsh desert and into a beautiful new land of milk and honey. As promised, they founded a new country and prospered under God's direction. The Pilgrim and Puritan colonists in America were relying heavily on these stories when they made their own journey to their own promised land. The Pilgrims and the Puritans were two Christian groups that were rebelling against the more established Christian churches of Europe. They saw them as corrupt and as deviating from God's design. They were convinced that these churches would soon be punished by God, and they desired to escape to the New World in order to start a new and pure Christian community. As they wandered over the perilous seas to the New World, they often self-consciously thought of themselves on the model of Abraham leading his people to a new land to start a godly nation. When they found that new land of the Americas, they thought of it as a new version of the promised land that had been originally offered to Abraham and his descendants. On this same model, they saw themselves as the new people chosen by God, and they saw their settlements as the beginning of a great community that would be a model of godly living that would eventually redeem a godless world. Of course, after settling in the New World, they soon faced harsh realities. Many colonists died of starvation and disease. Even when communities survived and eventually thrived, the Pilgrims and the Puritans found that their descendants were often less interested in founding a kingdom of God, and often more interested in trade, commerce, and non-religious pursuits. This is the end of our lecture on New Beginnings from the point of view of the Pilgrims and the Puritans.